The ballroom lights glared off Victor Langford's midnight blue Brioni suit. 40 investors watched as 2 security guards dragged the soaked mechanic toward the service exit. Victor's voice cut through the marble hall like a blade. "Stick to your grease rags and stay away from real innovation." Elias Crow kept his eyes on the floor. Rainwater dripped from his jacket onto the Italian tile. His daughter Sophie's tuition invoice for $1,870 sat folded in his back pocket like a second heartbeat. Victor had no idea the man he had just humiliated was the original architect of the neural interface exoskeleton his entire empire rested on. And that one quiet correction would soon unravel everything. What hidden truth had the machine been hiding from its most famous patient for 14 years? Elias had taken the emergency run at 11:52 p.m. because the $214 electric bill was 3 weeks late and Sophie's next asthma prescription was due in 4 days. No one else answered the dispatch. He loaded 2 cans of hydraulic fluid into the bed of his rusted pickup and drove 40 minutes through the storm to the cliffside mansion on Ridgeview Drive. The brass dog tag that once hung around his late wife's neck rested against his chest inside the damp coveralls. He touched it once at a red light. The metal was warm from his skin. Inside the mansion the housekeeper pointed him down the service corridor without meeting his eyes. Laughter spilled from the main gallery where 40 investors stood in tailored suits and $4,000 watches. Victor was in the center holding court. Elias set the cans on the stainless counter. He turned to leave. Then Victor's voice rang out again. Nobody let the delivery boy near anything worth more than his truck. The room erupted. Victor adjusted the Patek Philippe on his wrist, smiled for the cameras, and waved security forward. 2 guards seized Elias by the arms. His boots squeaked on the wet marble as they hauled him past the long table. That was when he heard it. A servo under the seated patient's left hip gave a single strangled click at 2:14 a.m. 2 milliseconds too long. The monitor on the armrest flickered red. Elena Voss, the paralyzed heiress whose face had sold Langford Neural to the world, leaned one way while the exoskeleton insisted she was falling the other. The stimulators fired anyway. The alarm tone rose into a scream. Elias stopped mid-stride. The guards yanked harder. He dropped to one knee anyway, fingers finding the concealed diagnostic port under the left hip fairing. No outsider should have known it existed. He flipped the cover. One precise keystroke on the hidden panel. The entire frame shuddered, then went dead silent. Elena's shoulders dropped. The monitor flattened into green. The screaming stopped. The laughter in the room died with it. Victor's face tightened. "Remove him." But Elena raised one trembling hand. Her voice carried across the sudden quiet. "Wait." She studied Elias for a long second. The brass dog tag had slipped from his collar during the struggle and now glinted under the chandelier. "What exactly did you just do?" He answered without theatrics, eyes on the floor. "Your left and right sensor channels have been swapped since at least 2011. The machine thinks you're spasming every time your nerves fire. It's been fighting you for 14 years. Victor gave a sharp laugh. "A garage mechanic is going to lecture us on 14 years of clinical data?" Dr. Lena Park, the skeptical young neurologist hired only 6 weeks earlier, stepped forward. She had been staring at the monitor. The numbers now made sense for the first time. Elena's gaze never left Elias. "Stay. I have questions." Victor objected. Elena overruled him with a single look. The guards released Elias's arms. He straightened his soaked coveralls, touched the dog tag once, and followed her team to the private lab on the 3rd floor. Day 1. They copied every byte to an air-gapped server 2 states away. Elias laid out 3 conditions. Dr. Park must supervise every physical test. No standing attempt without full medical clearance. Nothing hidden from Elena herself. Victor stormed out. Elena accepted every term. Day 2. They began reviewing the encrypted logs at 7 a.m. Elias's original safety routine, the one that should have flagged contradictory signals after 3 mismatches, had been commented out exactly 2 weeks before the $287 million series be closed in 2011. The reason was written in plain text in an old commit note. Marketing required smoother stage demos. Elena sat motionless in the frame while the truth landed. For 14 years every faint urge she had felt in her legs had been answered by the machine suppressing the signal and labeling it phantom noise. She had stopped telling doctors because every specialist gave the same reply. Wishful thinking. Day 3. Victor returned at 9:15 a.m. This time his tone was reasonable, almost warm. The midnight blue Brioni had been traded for charcoal. He set a leather folder on the table. Inside was an offer. $2.4 million in cash, a clean professional record, and a trust fund that would cover Sophie's entire education through graduate school. All Elias had to do was sign a statement blaming a recent firmware patch. Elias turned his coffee cup slowly. The brass dog tag shifted against his chest. Does that trust fund come with an invoice attached? Victor's smile thinned. He left without another word. Day 4. Leaked footage hit the tech blogs by noon. The edit made Elias look like a disgruntled former employee chasing money and fame. Reporters began calling the 24-hour garage on Industrial Boulevard. Sophie, 8 years old, had to walk past 2 camera crews just to reach the school bus. She clutched her backpack straps tighter but never cried where they could see. That night at 1:47 a.m. Elena sent a single text. The brass dog tag felt heavier when Elias read it. We're not stopping. Day 5. More buried reports surfaced. 3 separate occasions across 11 years where Elena's residual motor signals had been manually reclassified as involuntary reflex by someone inside Victor's inner circle. The digital signatures pointed back to Victor himself. Dr. Park's hands trembled slightly as she highlighted the timestamps. Elena looked at the data, then at Elias. 14 years, she said quietly. The lab lights buzzed overhead. Rain tapped the tall windows. The brass dog tag rested on the windowsill now, catching the gray morning light. Elias allowed himself one slow breath. The machine had been lying to its most famous patient since the day it was first strapped on. And they were only beginning to prove it. Day 6. At 7:42 a.m. the first lawsuit landed. A courier in a pressed uniform handed Elias an envelope thick enough to stop a bullet. Victor's legal team was suing for defamation, trade secret theft, and tortious interference with contract. The demand, $28 million. The filing included an affidavit from a retired colonel claiming Elias had been discharged under psychiatric evaluation in 2009. The signature on the bottom was forged. Elias read it once in the garage bay, the scent of motor oil and burnt coffee thick around him. Then he folded the pages neatly and slid them under the dog tag on the workbench. Sophie watched from the office doorway, her small sneakers squeaking on the concrete. Dad, are we going to lose the house? He knelt, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Not today, kiddo. The dog tag swung forward on its chain as he hugged her. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and the faint fear she tried to hide. Day 7. Elena's lawyers, the ones Elias had quietly retained through a shell firm in Delaware, filed the first countermotion at 9:03. The motion attached 17 pages of raw neural logs that no civilian should ever have seen. Victor countered by leaking a new video. This one showed Elias being escorted from the old headquarters in 2018, cardboard box in hand, looking every inch the bitter ex-employee. The caption underneath read, "Disgruntled mechanic tries to rewrite history." The comments section filled with laughing emojis by lunch. Elias sat alone in the break room at 2:14 p.m., staring at a cold slice of pepperoni pizza. The phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered on speaker. A crisp voice, the same one that had once congratulated him on mission 287, said, "Captain, you really want to open this door?" The line went dead before Elias could reply. He set the phone down. The brass dog tag felt warm against his sternum again, as if it had absorbed the tension in the room. Day 8. Mini crisis number 2 arrived in the form of a frozen bank account. At 10:17 a.m. the garage's operating line went to zero. Sophie's tuition autodraft for the semester bounced. The bank manager, a man with a voice like dry leaves, explained that regulatory holds had been placed pending litigation. Elias could hear Victor's Italian loafers pacing somewhere behind the decision. He hung up, walked to the far corner of the shop, and pulled the blue tarp off the old server rack he'd kept since the early days. Dust rose in a slow cloud that smelled like heated circuits and forgotten solder. Inside the rack, bolted behind a false panel, was a hardened drive the size of a paperback. Its label read simply, Project Lazarus, original firmware version 0.3, Elias M. Voss, lead. He copied 3 specific audit trails, encrypted them with a key only 4 people on Earth had ever known, and emailed them from an account that didn't exist on paper. Then he drove Sophie to school himself, the dog tag tapping quietly against the steering wheel in time with the windshield wipers. The reversal came at 3:56 p.m. Dr. Park met them at the lab's side entrance carrying a single sheet of thermal paper. Her hands no longer trembled. "The original code is still inside her implant," she said. "The suppression routine never deleted the old pathways. It only hid them. We can wake them." Elena sat in the calibration chair, eyes closed, while the new sequence compiled. When the first deliberate toe twitch registered on the monitor at 4:21, the only sound in the room was the soft click of the brass dog tag as Elias set it on the console beside the screen. Elena opened her eyes. A single tear tracked down her cheek and landed on the metal, making it glisten. Day 9. Victor appeared in person at the garage at 11:04 a.m. This time the suit was deep navy, the tie blood red. No folder this time. Just a warning delivered in a voice low enough that Sophie, eating cereal at the desk 10 feet away, couldn't quite hear. "You think dredging up ghost code makes you clever? I built this empire on top of your little secrets, boss. Walk away now and the offers get better. Stay in this fight and I bury you so deep even your daughter forgets your name." Victor's gaze flicked to Sophie. The threat hung in the air like exhaust fumes. Elias didn't raise his voice. He simply reached into his shirt, pulled the dog tag free, and let it catch the overhead fluorescence. "Colonel," he said, using the old rank for the first time in front of witnesses, "you still don't understand whose name is on the original patents." Victor's left eye twitched once. He turned on the heel of one spotless loafer and left. The garage door rattled down behind him. That night at 1:09 a.m. Elena sent another text. The message contained only a timestamp and a file. When Elias opened it, the screen filled with Elena's latest gait analysis. She had taken 12 unaided steps in the lab after midnight. No machine assistance. The brass dog tag lay on the nightstand, catching the blue glow of the phone. Elias stared at the video until the loop ended, then played it again. Sophie's bedroom door creaked. She padded in, stuffed Lion under one arm, and climbed onto the bed without asking. "Dad, is that lady going to be able to walk like us again?" He pulled her close. The lion's worn paw brushed the dog tag and made a soft fabric on metal sound. She already is, sweetheart. We're just making sure the whole world sees it. Day 10. The board of directors called an emergency session for 11 a.m. Victor arrived early, cufflinks flashing, confident the room would back him. What he didn't know was that Elias had spent the previous 43 minutes in the parking garage below, feeding a live uplink through the building's own unsecured maintenance network. Every word spoken upstairs would be recorded in crystal clarity. The first new mini-crisis dropped at 10:57. A process server burst through the garage doors waving a temporary restraining order that would have shut the entire shop down within the hour. The signature at the bottom belonged to a judge who played golf with Victor every other Sunday. The paper smelled of fresh toner and panic. Elias read it once, then dialed a number he had not used in 11 years. The voice that answered still carried the faint rasp of desert sand and jet fuel. Voss. You're really doing this? Affirmative. Need a quiet favor. 15 minutes. The line clicked. 12 minutes later the courthouse server spat out an emergency stay signed by a federal magistrate in another state. The process server's phone rang before he could even fold the useless order. He left without another word, shoes squeaking on the oil-stained floor. At exactly 11:32 a.m. the boardroom feed went live inside the garage. Victor's polished voice filled the space. Gentlemen, this man is a fabricator. A disgraced veteran with a grudge. We terminate this nonsense today. Elias let the word sit. Then he patched the original Lazarus firmware into the live demonstration Elena was performing 3 floors beneath the boardroom. The feed split. On one side, Victor speaking. On the other, Elena rising from her chair without robotic assistance for the first time in 14 years. The brass dog tag was clipped to the back of her collar like a quiet witness. The boardroom fell silent. Victor's mouth opened, but no sound came out for 3 full seconds. When it did, the polish had cracked. Cut the feed. Cut it now. The screen went black. But the recording kept rolling. Day 11. 19 hours to the public shareholder meeting. The counter ticked in the corner of every screen Elias owned. Reporters had doubled outside the garage. Sophie now left for school through the back alley, clutching the same lion and keeping her eyes on the cracked pavement. At 6:50 a.m. another buried report surfaced, this one linking Victor directly to the reclassification of 12 other test patients over 9 years. The numbers were exact, $41.7 million in unreported cost savings. The smell of fresh ink from the printed affidavits filled the office. Elias sat at the workbench, dog tag in his left hand, polishing it with a shop rag until the raised letters glowed. Each name on the tag, his old unit, his old life, felt heavier with every stroke. Elena arrived at 7:30 carrying coffee and a new gate graph. She moved with the careful grace of someone relearning her own body. When she set the cup down, her fingers brushed his. Neither of them spoke. The dog tag lay between them like a promise not yet paid in full. The next mini-crisis hit at 9:12 a.m. An anonymous tip reached the FAA claiming Elias had been flying drones illegally over restricted airspace to spy on corporate headquarters. 2 black SUVs pulled up outside the garage before the coffee had even cooled. Federal agents stepped out, badges bright in the morning sun. Their lead agent, a woman with a voice like gravel wrapped in velvet, asked to see the workshop. Elias led them inside without resistance. He let them open every locker, every drawer. When they reached the old server rack, the lead agent paused. Her eyes narrowed at the dust pattern on the false panel. Mind if we look behind here, Mr. Voss? He shrugged. Be my guest. She pulled the panel. The space behind it was empty. The hardened drive now sat inside a children's lunchbox in Sophie's backpack, 2 miles away at school. The agent's jaw tightened. She knew she'd been played, but she had no cause to hold him. They left at 9:41. The lead agent paused at the door, looked back once. Tell the colonel his golfing buddy just lost jurisdiction. Then she was gone. Elias exhaled, the first full breath in days. He walked to the window where the brass dog tag now hung from a nail driven into the frame. Sunlight struck it and threw a small, perfect circle of gold onto the concrete floor. Elena's voice came from behind him, soft but steady. Victor's starting to sweat. I saw it in his eyes on the leaked feed. He's realizing the man he threw away might still own the cage. Elias didn't turn around. He hasn't even seen the key yet. Day 12. 12 hours until the shareholder meeting. The garage smelled of strong coffee and tension. Sophie had stayed home, curled on the couch with her lion, watching cartoons with the volume low. Every so often she glanced toward the workbench where her father and Elena moved like people preparing for war with nothing but code and courage. At 4:07 p.m. the final pre-meeting leak dropped. Victor's team released a polished 30-second spot featuring Elena herself, smiling in a sleek wheelchair, praising the very system that had lied to her for 14 years. The voiceover said the words Victor had written, "I trust this technology with my life." The brass dog tag clicked against the workbench as Elias set it down hard. Elena watched the ad once. Then she stood, still slow, still deliberate, and walked to the window. Rain began to fall outside, tapping the glass like impatient fingers. She spoke without turning. Tomorrow they all sit in one room. Board members. Press. The same people who laughed when he fired you. I want them to see me stand up without the machine. I want Victor to look me in the eye when I do it. Elias joined her at the window. Their reflections stared back, two ghosts who had refused to stay buried. The dog tag rested between them on the sill again, catching the rainlight like a coin tossed long ago and only now returning to the hand that threw it. 11 hours to go. The grind continued, patient and precise, each new line of evidence another brick pulled from the foundation Victor had built on stolen truths. And somewhere in the city, in an office that still smelled of expensive cologne and fear, Victor stared at his own reflection in a dark monitor and felt the first cold touch of the debt coming due. The dog tag caught the light one more time as Elias slipped it into his shirt pocket. 11 hours became 10. Then 9. The rain kept falling, steady against the garage roof, a dull metallic drum that matched the rhythm of his fingers on the keyboard. Day 13. 8 hours until the shareholder meeting. Elena's apartment had become the war room. Takeout boxes from the Thai place on 14th Street cooled on the counter. Sophie slept in the next room, lion tucked under her chin, breathing soft and even. Every 90 minutes Elias checked on her, the way he used to check instruments at 10,000 feet. The child was the only calm thing left in the building. At 2:14 a.m. the first new crisis landed. A priority email from an anonymous tipper hit Elena's secure inbox. Victor's legal team had discovered the shadow account Elias had been feeding evidence into. They were already drafting an emergency injunction to freeze every server connected to the leaks. The subject line read simply, "Cease and desist by sunrise or we bury you both." Elena read it aloud, voice low so Sophie wouldn't wake. The words tasted like rust. Elias didn't flinch. He leaned back, cracked his knuckles once, and said, "They think they're locking the barn after the horse has already burned it down." He opened a second laptop. The screen glowed blue against his stubbled face. For the next 43 minutes he typed in silence, the only sound a soft click of keys and the distant hum of the city outside. Then he hit enter. A single line of green text appeared, "Backdoor rerouted through legacy satellite uplink number 287. The same uplink he had helped design in 2009, back when the company was still called Horizon Dynamics and he had signed every schematic with the call sign Ghost 9. Elena watched the cursor blink. They'll trace it. They'll trace it to a dead satellite that officially crashed in 2014, he said. Paperwork says it's space junk. I never filed the decommissioning order. The brass dog tag shifted against his chest as he breathed. A small, private reversal. One more brick pulled from Victor's wall without the man even knowing the shape of the tool being used. 4 hours until the meeting now. Dawn crept in gray and wet. The second crisis arrived at 6:47 a.m., this time by courier. A thick manila envelope slid under the apartment door. Inside were printed screenshots of Elena's medical records from the original trial 14 years earlier. Forged addendums claimed her paralysis had been psychosomatic all along. A neat post-it note in Victor's handwriting read, "Last chance. Walk away or we show the board she was never broken." Elena's hands trembled as she read. The paper smelled of fresh toner and old betrayal. She looked at Elias, eyes glassy, and whispered, "He's going to make them laugh at me again." Elias stood. He crossed the room, opened the drawer where Sophie kept her crayons, and pulled out a single folded napkin from the night they had first met at the hospital cafeteria. The same napkin he had used to sketch the original neural bridge schematic while Elena cried into her coffee. He set it on the table beside the dog tag. 14 years ago I sat across from you with this napkin and promised the machine would give you your legs back. Victor took the credit. Took the patents. Took everything. But he never took the promise. He opened the third laptop. For the next hour he worked in total silence, uploading a new packet labeled simply, Exhibit 0. It contained raw footage from the night of the original clinical trial. Not the polished version Victor had released. The unedited version where the neural interface first fired and Elena had taken 3 unaided steps across a concrete floor while the monitoring machine screamed in triumph. The timestamp read 3:12 a.m., January 17, 2010. Seat 18C in the observation theater had been occupied by a then junior engineer named Victor Lang. The upload finished at 7:52 a.m. 3 hours to the meeting. Sophie woke up then, dragging her lion behind her. She climbed into her father's lap without a word and rested her head on his chest. The dog tag pressed between them, warm from his skin. "Daddy, is today the day the bad man says sorry?" Elias smoothed her hair. "Today's the day he starts learning how." 2 hours and 40 minutes remaining. The third crisis came by phone. Victor himself called Elena's private line. The polished voice that once commanded boardrooms now carried a cracked edge. "Elena. Whatever game your janitor boyfriend is playing, it ends now. I have the original patent transfer documents. Signed by you. I can make this look like you sold him out for a payout. Walk into that room and I will destroy what's left of your reputation in front of every camera in the city." The line went dead. Elena set the phone down slowly. Rain had started again, harder this time, beating against the tall windows like it wanted in. She looked at the brass dog tag lying on the napkin, then at Elias. "He still thinks I need the machine to stand." Elias said nothing. He simply stood, walked to the closet, and pulled out the garment bag he had kept zipped for 14 years. Inside was the flight suit, faded but clean, the name tape across the chest reading, capped, E. Art of Us, Ghost 9. He laid it across the back of a chair like a promise. 1 hour and 57 minutes to the shareholder meeting. The grind tightened. They ran one final diagnostic on the patched feed that would hijack every screen in the auditorium the moment Victor tried to open the quarterly report. Sophie sat on the floor coloring, lion in her lap, occasionally holding up a drawing of a lion wearing a dog tag. At 9:33 a.m. the fourth crisis hit. A news alert pinged. Victor had called an unscheduled press conference in the lobby of the building. He was going to preempt the shareholder meeting entirely, paint Elena as a bitter ex-employee trying to cash in on old lies. The live stream was already rolling. Victor stood in his Brioni suit, Patek glinting under the lights, Italian shoes planted wide. "I regret that certain former colleagues have chosen this moment to spread disinformation," he said, voice smooth as ever. "But the truth is simple. The technology works because of the team that stayed. Not the ones who left carrying grudges." The camera caught the faint sheen of sweat at his hairline. Elias saw it. Elena saw it. 54 minutes left. Elias looked at his daughter. "Stay here with the lion, kiddo. Daddy has to go pay an old debt." Sophie nodded solemnly and handed him the brass dog tag she had been playing with. He looped the chain around his neck, the metal cool against his skin once more. The same tag that had once kept him alive through 287 combat missions. The same tag Victor had laughed at the day he fired him, calling it scrap from a dead pilot's locker. Elena stood beside him at the door. She didn't need the chair today. The grind had given her that much already. "Whatever happens in that room," she said, "they're going to see both of us stand." The elevator doors closed. The dog tag clicked softly against Elias's sternum with every descent. Rain streaked the glass walls of the lobby as they stepped out into the city. 31 minutes until the shareholder meeting began. Victor's voice echoed from the press conference still underway in the atrium. The same polished tone, the same expensive cologne drifting through the air like poison. But this time Elias walked straight toward the sound, Elena at his side, the slow collection of the debt entering its final measured beats. The grind was not over. Not yet. 28 minutes. They moved through the growing crowd of reporters and board members who had arrived early. A few recognized Elena. Whispers started. One junior analyst dropped his tablet, it clattered on the marble like a warning shot. Victor turned at the noise. His eyes found Elias across 20 feet of polished floor. For the first time in 14 years the two men looked at each other without the buffer of corporate hierarchy. The brass dog tag caught the atrium lights and flashed once, like a signal flare dropped behind enemy lines. Victor's mouth opened, closed. The Patek on his wrist suddenly looked too heavy. 21 minutes to the meeting. The debt kept moving forward, patient, precise, and still invisible to almost everyone watching. But the cage was opening. And the man who had built it was finally starting to feel the bars press back. The brass dog tag settled heavier against Elias's chest as the atrium lights caught its edge again. Victor's polished smile faltered for half a second, then snapped back into place like a mask. "Security," he called, voice smooth as ever, the Brioni suit still knife-sharp under the fluorescence. "We have an unauthorized guest. Escort the janitor and his friend out before they track in more mud." A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the early arrivals. Someone's expensive heels clicked backward. The smell of Victor's cologne thickened, cloying and chemical. Elena's fingers brushed Elias's wrist once. "Steady." The dog tag clicked again as he breathed. 20 minutes. Security moved in, two men in starched shirts whose hands already knew the choreography. But Elias simply lifted the laminated visitor badge he had never turned in 14 years ago. The one with his real name, the one the system had never been allowed to delete. The first guard stopped mid-step. The second actually read it. Their eyes widened. Victor noticed. The Patek flashed as he checked his watch, buying time. "Day 14, Elias said quietly, just loud enough for the nearest cluster of analysts to hear. "Still collecting." He turned before Victor could answer and guided Elena toward the glass-walled conference room where the shareholder meeting would open in 19 minutes. The dog tag tapped a slow, metallic rhythm against his sternum with every stride. Inside the prep lounge just off the main floor, the air smelled of fresh coffee and fierce sweat. A young executive named Marcus, the same one who had once handed Elias a mop after Victor's final tirade, stood frozen by the espresso machine. His tie was already loosened. Mr. Elias? The name came out cracked. Elias nodded once. He set a single manila folder on the counter. Inside were the original maintenance logs from the collapse of Wing C. The ones Victor had ordered shredded. The ones Elias had carried out in a janitor's bucket under a layer of sawdust. Marcus opened it. His hands trembled. The paper smelled faintly of oil and thyme. You kept these? Every page. Day 15 is when the board gets them if this room doesn't listen. The young man's face drained of color. He looked at Elena, at the way she stood without the chair now, then back at the faded brass tag resting against Elias's shirt. I thought you were just the night cleaner. I was. Among other things. 17 minutes. A fresh mini-crisis bloomed right there in the lounge. One of Victor's loyal VPs burst in, phone already to his ear, barking orders to kill the feed to the overflow room. He saw the folder. Saw Elias. The phone slipped from his manicured fingers and clattered onto the marble exactly as the junior analyst's tablet had minutes earlier. The VP's voice dropped to a hiss. You think a few old logs change anything? The stock is already down 4% on the leak you planted. Victor will have you arrested before the gavel drops. Elias said nothing. He simply reached into his pocket and produced a second object, a single brass key on a ring that matched the dog tag's patina. The key to the original server cage in sub-basement 3. The one no one had accessed since the night Elias walked out with his box. The VP's eyes locked on it. Recognition hit like cold water. That's impossible. We changed the locks. You changed the visible ones. Day 16 of the grind taught me patience. The VP swallowed. The small reversal landed in the silence that followed. Marcus stepped away from the espresso machine and stood a little closer to Elias than corporate etiquette allowed. The first crack in the old loyalty appeared right there, no louder than a dropped phone. 16 minutes. They moved into the main conference room as a loose group now. Reporters outside pressed against the glass like fish against aquarium walls. Victor had already taken the head of the long oak table, Italian shoes crossed at the ankle, pretending calm. The cologne reached them even from 20 feet away. Elias and Elena chose seats near the back, uninvited but unchallenged. The dog tag caught the overhead lights again and threw a tiny circle of gold onto the polished tabletop. Victor's gaze kept drifting to it. 15 minutes until the meeting officially began. The room filled with the low murmur of expensive suits and shifting paper. Someone's briefcase clicked open. The scent of leather and anxiety thickened. Then the new crisis arrived in the form of an email alert that swept every board member's phone at once. Victor's own device buzzed loudest. He read it. The color left his face in a slow tide. The message was from an offshore auditing firm Elias had quietly engaged on day 12. It contained a preliminary finding: $347 million in pension funds rerouted through shell accounts wearing Victor's personal signature. The same accounts that had paid for the Patek, the Brioni, the cologne that now smelled suddenly sour. Victor looked up. His eyes found Elias across the rising noise. For the first time the polished mask slipped completely. The man underneath looked 14 years younger and infinitely older at the same time. You, he whispered. The word didn't carry, but the shape of it did. Elias simply adjusted the chain so the dog tag lay flat against his sternum. The metal had warmed now, carrying his body heat the way it once had at 30,000 feet over hostile territory on Mission 214. Elena leaned in, voice low. He still thinks it's just money. He hasn't seen the rest yet. 14 minutes. The board members buzzed like a kicked hive. One elderly investor, the same woman who had once watched Victor fire Elias and said nothing, stood up on unsteady legs. Her pearls clicked together as she demanded an immediate closed session. Victor tried to wave it away with the smooth gesture that used to close million-dollar deals. It didn't land. The email had already been forwarded to 3 major wire services. The atrium outside erupted in camera flashes. A fresh self-contained reversal unfolded in the next 60 seconds. The head of HR, a woman named Carla who had processed Elias's termination papers without reading them, quietly slid a single sheet across the table to Elena. It was the original performance review Victor had buried. The one that listed Elias's real credentials before the cover story of maintenance contractor had been stamped on top. Carla's hands shook only a little. I should have looked closer. Day 17. I remember the date on these stamps. Elena accepted the page without triumph. She folded it once and tucked it beside the brass tag now resting against Elias's heart. The symbolic metal warmed further, as if remembering every prior quiet proof. 13 minutes. Victor rose. The Patek caught the light like a dying star. He walked to the podium at the front of the room even though the meeting had not been called to order. His voice, when it came, carried the first fracture. Ladies and gentlemen, there appears to be some confusion about past records. I assure you. The atrium doors opened behind him. More shareholders poured in, drawn by the growing storm. Among them walked the retired general whose call sign Elias still carried in his muscle memory. The man nodded once across the growing crowd. Recognition passed between them like a quiet flare. Victor saw it. His mouth went dry. The dog tag clicked once as Elias stood. 12 minutes to go. The grind tightened another measured turn. Victor's eyes tracked the brass circle like it was a live round chambered and waiting. The debt was no longer invisible. It had a shape now, a rhythm, a temperature against living skin. And still the cage had more bars to press. 11 minutes. A junior coder, the same kid who used to leave energy drinks on Elias's cart during the night shift, slipped into the seat beside them. He carried a laptop older than most of the phones in the room. On its lid was a faded sticker from the original defense contract Elias had designed before Victor bought the company and buried its creator. The coder opened the machine. The screen glowed with lines of pristine code, the original architecture that still quietly ran 63% of the firm's secure backbone. The same backbone Victor had claimed as his own invention during the IPO roadshow. The kid didn't speak. He simply turned the screen so half the table could see. A soft collective inhale traveled the room like wind through dry grass. Victor's cologne no longer masked the faint metallic scent rising from the dog tag as Elias's pulse quickened. 10 minutes. The next mini-crisis arrived in the form of a courier who entered through a side door no one was supposed to use. The man carried a small locked case. He walked straight to Elias, ignoring every protocol in the building. The case clicked open. Inside lay the original flight journals from the 287 missions, each page stamped with a classification level that made the general in the back row sit up straighter. The courier spoke only to Elias. They said you'd be here today, sir. The old squadron kept them safe. Victor's knuckles went white on the podium edge. The Italian shoes shifted, suddenly uncertain on the marble that had once felt like his own battlefield. Elena reached over and touched the dog tag with 2 fingers, the way Sophie had done that morning. The metal carried the memory of a child's solemn eyes and a father's promise. The grind continued, patient as ever. The debt still had distance left to run. 9 minutes. Another small reversal bloomed when the elderly investor with the pearls cleared her throat and asked, voice trembling with new understanding, if the man wearing the brass tag would care to address the board before any further votes were cast. Victor tried to cut her off. The words came out too loud, too sharp. The mask was gone now. Beneath it sat a man who could feel the bars of his own cage tightening one precise click at a time. Elias remained seated. He let the silence stretch until the only sound was the soft metallic tap of the dog tag keeping time against his chest. The room waited. 8 minutes to the formal opening. The collection moved forward, slow, procedural, and now impossible to ignore. The lion was no longer in the cage. It was walking the floor. The shareholder meeting opened exactly on time. Victor stood at the podium, voice polished but cracking at the edges as he tried to steer the agenda toward quarterly numbers. Elias waited until the first slide appeared, then triggered the patched feed. Every screen in the auditorium switched to the unedited clinical trial footage. Elena's 3 unaided steps filled the room in crystal clarity while the original monitors screamed triumph. The timestamp glowed, January 17, 2010. Victor's younger face was visible in seat 18C. Gasps rippled through the shareholders. Board members turned toward Victor. The retired general rose slowly. Margaret Holt tapped her pearls once and called for an immediate vote of no confidence. Victor's Italian shoes stayed rooted, but the patek on his wrist trembled. The brass dog tag caught the lights as Elias stood beside Elena. She took one deliberate step forward without the exoskeleton, then another. 14 years of suppression ended in that single walk down the center aisle. By the time security reached them, the room had already turned. The original patents, the reclassified logs, the pension rerouting, the shredded maintenance records, all of it spilled across the table in neat folders. Victor's empire unraveled in real time under the weight of its own stolen foundation. The board voted him out before lunch. Federal investigators arrived by mid-afternoon. The last image broadcast that day showed Victor being escorted past the same marble hallway where he had once humiliated a soap mechanic in front of 40 investors. This time the laughter was gone. The only sound was the quiet metallic click of a brass dog tag as Elias slipped it back beneath his shirt, the debt finally paid in full. Sophie met them at the garage that evening, lion under one arm, tuition invoice already marked paid. She ran to her father and pressed the worn fabric paw against the metal tag. The soft fabric on metal sound carried the only ending any of them needed. The machine had lied for 14 years. The man it had tried to erase had just made certain the truth walked free.